Greetings, everyone, and welcome to Covenant Security Solutions' inaugural Lunch and Learn series. We are so excited to have you here with us today. Mr. John McCarthy is going to provide great insights on Executive Order 13636. And just so you get a little bit about who we are, Covenant Security Solutions has been a provider in the cyberspace for the past decade, assisting companies in looking at cybersecurity from an integrated and holistic perspective. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Ms. Margie Perry. She is our Director of Cybersecurity and Education for the company, and she will go over for you an introduction to John McCarthy, and we'll begin. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much, Danietta. It gives me great pleasure to introduce a man who has not only taught me the importance of critical infrastructure protection, but he's influenced my way of thinking about how we are all connected in the great circle of life in cyberspace. John is a highly respected executive and trusted subject matter expert in homeland security research and development, cyberspace security, critical infrastructure assurance, maritime security and safety, as well as crisis and incident management. His career traversed government, academia, and corporate sectors, and he's truly a respected thought leader. John is also a trusted advisor among current and former high-level federal government officials. He's acted as a liaison to senior White House and federal agency executives. John has also served as an advisor on various private sector homeland security efforts as well. So with little to do, I'd like to give the platform over to John. Thank you again, John. John, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry, can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay. Marjorie, thank you for the very kind introduction. Danietta, I'm honored to be the kickoff speaker for the webinar, and I'm happy that the technology is working. As a practitioner of cybersecurity, I am extremely supportive of this type of outreach and promotion effort and the fostering of a public-private discussion on how to approach and move forward on cybersecurity issues. I commend Covenant for their leadership in the cybersecurity training space and the promotion of best practices over the years. The topic today, as you know, is about the executive order, but to kind of set this up, Mark knows me as a quasi-academic. I was a part-time instructor for Syracuse University Information Security Program. And my approach is usually very direct. I was always known for being direct about what's going to be on the test. You pick the desk and you say test material coming. What we're going to in brief today are a couple of themes, or what I call themes or threads, that are called cyber stakeholders. It isn't rocket science or wisdom of the ages or something you haven't heard before. But I think it's important when you put it in the context of what the intent of this executive order and the standards that follow from it, and how can you implement and use those as tools in your organization, whether you're a government agency, whether you're a big corporation servicing the government or a client base, or you're a medium to small business. I think it's all applicable. Our themes are bottom line, threat, risk, requirement for action. Bottom line, threat, risk, and requirement for action. In the context of those themes, we all know as cyber professionals pros and cons. We know the pros of cyber and what it brings to our organization. It brings efficiency, leapfrogging change, innovation, process improvement, efficiencies. So we know all the good things. We also know a lot of the bad things. The interjection of complexity into the organization so that make bad things happen faster. You know, it requires a tech savvy of the workforce that wasn't expected 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it introduces unforeseen liabilities. And I think these are the things that are at the top of a C-level executive's view. What are the unforeseen liabilities? Those come in the form of interdependencies, vulnerabilities, activities and processes that are covered by the use of the technology and the connections you're making in the supply chain and internal to the organization that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago. So within that context, let's look at what we're talking about with the bottom line. You know, the bottom line is a common thread for all the organizations. Everyone has it. The organizational modes, district, the different types of organizations, and everybody says, you know, you go into a discussion or a conference, says, I'm in big business, so, you know, you in government, the government background would understand this. I'm in government, you would understand private sector. I'm in a nonprofit organization, my needs are very different than everyone else's. Well, when you really boil all that down, I think that's baloney. Big business, you have money and private sector are part of the bottom line. Those are the key elements. I'm sorry, money and client service, providing whatever it is you're making, if you're in manufacturing, whether you're information, whatever it is you're delivering to a customer for them to purchase, that's your bottom line. In government, it's also about money. Let's not kid ourselves. Budgets and financial health of a public sector organization is critical to its survival. It comes in different forms. They get it from a different source. But make no mistake that that's not a key part of decision making in a government agency. What are they delivering? Instead of delivering a client service, they're delivering a public service. They're delivering emergency services. They're delivering financial counseling. They're collecting taxes or whatever it is the focus of the government agency is. A nonprofit, let's not kid ourselves again. They spend a lot of time fundraising. They get a lot of time bringing in and ensuring that they have a baseline that they can continue to provide the promotion of value service that they represent. So all of these organizational modes seem to approach cybersecurity. We talk about each one of these from a different perspective. But in reality, I believe that it's a common structure. I will get to M&Ms. They come in different colors and different sizes, but they're all the same on the inside. They're essentially the same. The cybersecurity element of every one of those organizations, no matter how large, whether you're the Department of Defense and Veterans Affairs, or whether you're Microsoft and Facebook, or whether you are the American Red Cross or some local chapter of a nonprofit group, it's all the same. It's a function of scaling and applicability, what elements are applicable to your organization. And we'll get into that when we look at the executive order, particularly. I was at a conference last week down in Atlanta, security conference, and I sat next to a fella at one of the lunches who was a GE information security manager, very senior guy, based out of their headquarters. He was responsible for basically coming up with criticality assessment across all of GE's business units. Now, I just spent 5.5 years working in Army headquarters for the Department of Army, working on their critical infrastructure. The Army is a massive, it is the biggest organization I've ever worked with. It's global, it has global infrastructure, global reach, its technology is going all over the world. And sitting down, listening to this executive and discussing critical infrastructure prioritization, I may as well, and I'm talking to an industry executive, I may as well have been talking to a general in the Army. Same issues, same problems. How do I, one, articulate what our critical infrastructure is? What is that stuff that truly is of national economic, national security, or providing the essential emergency services on behalf of the government or the industry? What are those functions, and is that my whole organization? Levels of protection, you have to begin to look at them in different tiers. And this is what the executive at GE was struggling is, just as the Army leadership is struggling to say, where do I invest limited dollars for protection? So the weighting of the criticality, the value of the asset, it's exactly the same problem in industry or government. In GE, in the Army, it's is it this communication system? Is it this training function? Is it this thing that's delivering an end product to the warfighter? Or in GE, he's looking at it from the standpoint, is this part of our space program that's supporting rocket launches, or is this part of the electric light bulb group, and do I need the same levels of protection, and then within those, what are the processes? It's akin, if you're noticing a theme in my discussion, in my thinking, it's food. You know, we have M&Ms and we have a spaghetti pile. It's how do you look at the pile of spaghetti and begin to pull out those assets and threads out of the pile and identify them as your internal critical infrastructure. Now, the EO, the executive order, is talking about critical infrastructure in the formal sense. It goes, you know, we have the definition, and I'm sure you're all familiar with it, the national security element, the national economic element, or the public health and safety element. But not all organizations and not all elements of the organization have that priority. The Army is a national security element organization, but not all of its systems and processes are true critical infrastructure. GE is a very large organization, same thing. Some of what they do does support that, and the EO does apply to them. But there's a large portion that the EO itself, the executive order itself, does not apply, but the concepts apply. And you can begin to tailor and scope down those to the parts of a critical infrastructure owner or operator or business that applies to those pieces that are supporting critical infrastructure on a national scale. And then you can begin to move back those to use them as best practices. So that's looking at it from the standpoint of the bottom line. The next common thread is the standpoint of threat. Now, we don't need to spend a lot of time on threat. You all are on the telephone line here today at your lunch hour because of the threat. That thread, which is common to all organizations, although in different proportions, is what your leadership understands and has you spending your time to understand. If you spend any time, any day, you pick up a newspaper, look at the web, you'll see something about the cyber threat. Last weekend, the FBI, director of the FBI, Mr. Comey, he was on 60 Minutes. If you had a chance to see that, it was a if you didn't, it would be if you have to go in and convince your leadership, if you have to go in and you're still in the stage where you're trying to convince C-level executives in your organization that there is a threat, just play his comments. He was very forthright, probably more forthright than any senior cyber executive in the government that I've heard speak in a long time. And he named names. He specifically talked about China. He says China tops the list of countries that are directly stealing secrets from major U.S. firms. He quantified it in the billions of dollars. But what's interesting about that is he talked about the list. So China may be the biggest, but it ain't the only one. An interesting quote was, there are two kinds of big companies in the United States. There are those who have been hacked by Chinese and those who don't know they've been hacked by the Chinese. So the question to your leadership is, which one are we? And if we are an organization that has a large portion of our business that is a service provider to government agencies through defense, homeland security, other government services, you need to pay attention to that comment. If you're an organization that has nothing to do with the government and you're providing critical services critical to you, to the private sector, to your bottom line, you should be paying attention equally to that discussion. If you are a small business owner, the question becomes, how do I address this, and what does it mean on my scale? And we'll talk about that. So I think we're at the point where we are getting past the justification stage to leadership. It's, I got it. You know, every good CEO will say, look, I got it. But my question is, what am I doing now that I shouldn't be doing? What am I not doing now that I should be doing? The translation to that is, how much do I spend on security? How much is enough? How do I tailor a program to meet our particular needs in our organization? That leads us to the risk threat, which will take us directly to the executive order. Bottom line of the organization, when you define that, when you say what is it that we are about, what services are we providing, and what processes do we have to maintain in order to do that, that is the entering input into any risk model. So understanding that bottom line and that common thread is you're telling the risk managers what is important and what needs to be prioritized. So that bottom line is translated into processes and assets, and from that you determine your critical infrastructure. You begin to pull the spaghetti bowl apart and separate the strands that are truly quote-unquote critical infrastructure, and those that are important to your organization, and those that are important but would maintain a lesser level of security. The bottom line is, what are you protecting? What you protect is what you value, whether that's money, asset, capacity, or more importantly in today's world, information. Okay, that takes us to our Executive Order 13636, and it's placed because the executive order is intended to get at having leadership in government and a request and outreach to private sector leadership to be looking at risk models specifically for the protection of critical infrastructure. That's the disruption of water, power, communications, other critical systems. But it's a document that's all about holistic thinking about security and risk management. That again, it's M&M. It can apply to any color of M&M and any size of M&M. Secure critical infrastructure and resiliency are the key themes, whether that's, again, formal critical infrastructure that's defined in national, the Patriot Act and through the Homeland Security, or whether that's the infrastructure that an organization like GE or a medium or small has. The executive order is focused, broken down into kind of 5 focused areas. It's number 1 is develop a technology-neutral, voluntary cybersecurity framework. Okay, that's a common lens. Develop a common lens for everyone's bottom line. Number 2 is promote and incentivize the adoption of security practices. That's common action. Everyone, and it doesn't mean that everyone's security practices are going to be the same. What they're doing in the Department of Defense versus what they're doing in the General Services Administration or the Small Business Administration, it's not necessarily the same practice, but it's a common action. Increase the volume, timeliness, and quality of cyber threat information sharing. That's common knowledge. How do you promote common knowledge? The information sharing piece is at the key to this public-private dialogue, and that's what we have struggled with for since the mid-1990s when this whole domain first started. Is what are the key elements that can be shared? Number 4, what's incorporating strong? How to incorporate strong privacy and civil liberties? How do you do this while still protecting the rights that we've outlined? To to me, that's seen as common protection. How do we ensure that you as a citizen interacting with the government and vice versa, that your privacies are being protected? And this technology that is being used for intrusion detection and prevention raises a lot of questions. We've seen that through the NSA. It raises a great deal of issues relative to our privacy and how we are as a nation, and that has to be dealt with. Explore the use of existing regulation to promote cybersecurity. That's, to me, the common good. You know, what is it that we are doing as a nation from a regulatory, from a promotion of best practices element or non-regulatory to secure the common good on an open and free internet that's maintaining egalitarian principles and balancing, you know, competing priorities. That's the challenge for us as we move forward. So that's the outline of the executive order, and it's challenging agencies and government departments, as well as those private sector elements that are supporting critical infrastructure, begin to develop that common lens and all those other common elements I described, and to begin to look at implementing a framework. And in the course of that, to justify security investments and actions of senior leaders, you got to have a framework. So the government provided one directed by the executive order, through NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, to develop a common framework for all the government agencies, and that can also be used by the private sector to view how an organization should look at the key elements of what an overall protection program would be. It talks about prioritization and scope of assets, the orientation of the cyber program, the creation of current profiles of what your assets are, conducting risk assessments, developing target profiles of those elements, those pieces of spaghetti you should focus on, determine, analyze, prioritize gaps, and implement gaps in your policy, in your technology, in your protection standards, and then how do you come up with an ultimate implementation plan or action plan. And on the screen, you should see a nice color-coded chart. And the NIST folks have broken this down, and this is the highest level of breakdown. The functions to identify business environment. Can everybody still hear me? I just got a message.
You're breaking up a little, but we can still hear.
Okay. Protection, detection, response, and recover. To security professionals, this is not, again, rocket science, but it breaks it down in a form. Why don't you go to the next slide, Marjorie? It breaks it down into a form that is digestible, and this is Prego spaghetti sauce. It's all in there, and begin to move down in the organization, your organization, and say what pieces of this are applicable to what I'm doing. This is an example of taking a framework and driving down to the next level of detail. And this I just picked randomly under identify. It says asset management. It gives you description. And it gives you the subcategory within that. We're talking about physical devices. We're talking about software platforms, organizational communication. All of those elements, it's breaking you down. You need to assess this. Within your organization, physical devices might not be an issue, whereas software platforms may be your major focus. I think is particularly useful about the framework is, again, whether government standards apply to you or not, this is a good place where if you're looking to justify to senior leaders and saying, you know, here are accepted practices across a wide variety of types of organizations. You have ISO standards, you have CSS standards, you have COBIT, all the rest of this, ISO, you have accepted industry and national standards that you can rely on to say, we should be doing this because the experts are.
John, we have a
An
question.
idea of a more technical one. The next slide, Marjorie.
John, we have a question. Someone asked if they're brand new to all of this, where do they start?
Well, where you start is first begin to look at your organization and begin to assess and scope where you want to be. Again, the NIST framework and the executive order are a good place for you to help organize your thoughts and frame a discussion for your leadership and for your cybersecurity element to say, how will we scope and then build a program that's based in industry best practice, it's based in a thorough assessment and an honest look at what we're doing from a risk management perspective. You know, really that's what I have for presentation. Let's continue with the questions. Does anybody have any specific questions?
I remember as a beginner in all of this many moons ago, and I was just basically very overwhelmed by all of the reading and research, and it's just, it could be pretty difficult to wrap your head around all the information. What do you recommend other than research and reading and actually working with the folks within your organization? Should there be some kind of strategic plan within the organization that also connects the framework with the business management strategy? What do you recommend?
Well, absolutely. I mean, you're hitting on key points. I don't know where you got your education, but it's excellent. You have a very good background. That was a joke.
Thanks to you.
Marjorie made an excellent point. The linking of your framework for implementation of a cybersecurity program, whether it's the administrative piece, the management piece, or the technical or process piece, it has to go back and link to your strategic goals in the organization. What are the strategic goals based on? They're based on the bottom line. The entering argument into the strategic goals is what we do. It's called a mission statement. You know, this is what we are here to do, and then everything should flow down from that. And your security, whether, again, if the executive you're talking to you is focused strictly on the money aspect, you have to justify your program from a money perspective. How does my information security proposal or course of action, recommended course of action, save you money? If we can stop the theft of a trade secret or a critical piece of information, that will save us in the long run in legal expenses or whatever. There's some cost-benefit analysis that needs to go into that. There's plenty of resources out there. It is overwhelming, but that's why you have organizations like yours, people who can come in and help you develop that framework, and that's part of what the executive order and the NIST framework are intending. You know, when I first started in this field after the President's Commission on Critical Infrastructure and the original presidential directive, PDD 63, that everybody's heard about, you know, that was back in the mid-90s and early 2000 in Y2K. The original findings of the President's Commission on Critical Infrastructure Protection said that government has to serve as a model. That's something that I think has gotten lost, meaning that the government should be putting out their best practices. It should be putting out frameworks. It should be giving people in the private sector a good structure that's a collection of best practices for them to build their program on. And I think this is what the NIST standard does. This is what the executive order does, and it's what Covenant Security Solutions does for people. And I think it's critical that this type of information and discussion keep going forward, and I commend the webinar series. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Well, with that being said, John, we really appreciate you sharing your time because I understand how busy of a man you are with all of your initiatives going on. But we welcome everyone's appreciation for what you do, and we hope to hear many more great things about the things that are going on out there. Again, I'd like to thank you for your time and your consideration, and I thank everyone who logged in today for attending.
Thanks, everybody, for listening.
This is the end of our presentation. Come back in a couple of weeks. We look forward to seeing you. Thank you very much.